my God! What happened? Are you okay?
It was a December night so cold that even the stars refused to shine. The wind screamed through tall pine trees, carrying tiny flakes of snow that danced across the empty lawns of the Raymond mansion. Inside those golden walls, everything was silent. Warm lights flickered. Fires burned behind marble fireplaces, but beyond the gates, winter showed no mercy. And there, near a frozen fountain, sat a little girl, barefoot, thin. Her small body trembled under the touch of the icy wind. Her name was Lila, only 12 years old, a maid in the mansion. She hugged her knees, whispering weak apologies into the dark, her breath forming white clouds that disappeared before her eyes. Her thin dress was soaked with snow. Her fingers, pale and stiff, tried to cover her face from the freezing air. She had been sent outside because she broke a glass, an expensive crystal glass that didn't survive her small, tired hands. The lady of the house, cold and proud, had shouted at her, calling her useless, and pushed her out. So Lila sat there waiting, hoping the night would end soon. But time moved slower than her heartbeat. Far away, the sound of an engine echoed. Headlights cut through the fog. A black car stopped before the mansion gate. The door opened and Mr. Raymond, the billionaire owner of the house, stepped out. He had returned home after weeks of travel, a man of power, yet known for his gentle heart. Snow fell softly on his shoulders as he walked toward the entrance, exhausted but calm. Then something made him stop. A faint sound, almost like a cry, reached his ears. He turned, looking across the garden, and there, he saw her. A small figure curled beside the fountain, shaking, covered in snow. He hurried forward, shocked by what he saw. Lila's body was trembling so hard that her teeth clattered. Her skin was pale, her lips blue. She looked up, frightened, but too weak to speak. The man's heart broke. He lifted his coat and wrapped it around her tiny frame. The warmth of the fabric met her cold skin like sunlight touching frost. Without a word, he carried her inside the mansion. As the doors closed, the golden light swallowed the darkness behind them. Inside, everything was warm and quiet again. But the warmth felt different now. It felt like guilt. The house that had been filled with luxury had forgotten the meaning of mercy. Mr. Raymond took the child to a small guest room. He placed her near the heater, covering her with blankets. Steam rose from the cup of milk he brought her, and slowly, color began to return to her cheeks. The little girl looked around, confused, almost afraid to breathe. For the first time, someone had shown her kindness. She had spent months in that mansion, unseen, unheard, existing only to clean, to serve, to obey. But tonight, someone noticed her tears. While the child slept, peace returned to her face. Her breathing softened. And as Mr. Raymond watched her, a deep sadness filled his heart. How could a home so rich be so poor in compassion? He looked out the window. Snow, falling endlessly over the garden where she had nearly frozen, and whispered to himself that no one would ever suffer like that. Again under his roof. Hours passed. The fire burned low. The mansion was quiet except for the ticking of a clock. Mr. Raymond sat alone in his study, staring at the old photographs on his desk, memories of happiness long gone. He realized that somewhere along his journey to wealth, his house had lost its soul. But tonight, that soul had returned in the form of a small, broken child. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight entered through the curtains. Lila opened her eyes to warmth she had never known. A soft blanket wrapped her like an embrace. Beside her bed lay folded clothes, simple, but clean, and a plate of breakfast still warm. The smell of bread filled the air, and for the first time her lips curved into a smile. Outside, the mansion looked calm under the golden light. Birds perched on snowy branches, singing softly. The world felt new again. In another part of the mansion, Mr. Raymond stood by the window, watching the same morning sun rise. He had made a silent promise to himself, a promise stronger than any law or contract. He would protect that girl. He would give her the childhood life had stolen. Because sometimes fate doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes it sends a little girl shivering in the snow to remind us what humanity truly means. That night had changed everything. It was the moment when kindness defeated cruelty, when warmth conquered winter. It was the night when a man who owned the world realized he still had something left to give, love. And as the snow continued to fall outside the great mansion, the little girl slept peacefully for the first time, dreaming not of fear but of a tomorrow that might finally be gentle. The morning sun rose slowly over the Raymond mansion, melting the last traces of snow that had covered the lawn where little Lila almost froze to death the night before. Inside, the house seemed peaceful, but deep within, storms were beginning to form. Mr. Raymond had not slept much that night. He kept replaying the image of the trembling little girl, sitting helplessly in the cold. The thought pierced his heart. He had seen poverty, he had seen pain, but never inside his own home. A home he believed was built on comfort, love, and care. Lila was still asleep, wrapped warmly under thick blankets. The peaceful expression on her face reminded him how innocence could survive, even in the harshest of places. For a brief moment, he smiled, but it quickly faded when he thought of his wife, Veronica. He walked quietly into the living room, where the fire still burned from last night. Veronica sat there reading a magazine as if nothing had happened. Her beauty was cold, sharp, like ice that never melts. She looked up casually and said, "I hope your little rescue project doesn't interfere with my morning." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Raymond didn't reply. He just stared at her, searching for even a flicker of compassion in her eyes, but found none. In that silence, he realized how far apart they had grown. The woman he once thought had a heart now looked like a stranger sitting in his own house. He finally spoke, his voice low but steady.
Veronica.
"That child could have died, and you did nothing." But she only shrugged. "She's just a maid, Raymond. We pay her to work, not to cry." The words stung him deeply. He turned away, unwilling to argue. Sometimes silence speaks louder than anger. Hours passed. The mansion's staff went about their chores quietly. No one dared to speak about what happened last night. But whispers filled the corners. Everyone knew the master of the house was furious, and the mistress was pretending not to care. Later that afternoon, Lila woke up. Her small eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the golden light of the guest room. For a moment, she seemed confused, unsure if she was still dreaming. The bed felt soft. The blanket was warm. The room smelled of flowers, not dust and soap like the servants' quarters. She sat up, clutching the coat that still hung near the bed, the same coat Mr. Raymond had wrapped around her. She held it to her chest like a treasure, her little heart overwhelmed with gratitude. But when she stepped out of the room, she felt a sudden fear. She didn't know what would happen now. Would the cruel madam throw her out again? Would she lose this warmth as quickly as she had found it? Her footsteps were soft, almost hesitant, as she walked down the hallway. And there, near the study, she saw Mr. Raymond standing by the window, lost in thought. He turned when he heard her, and a kind smile appeared on his face. "Good morning, little one," he said gently. "How are you feeling?" Lila lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to make trouble. Madam told me to leave because I broke the glass." Her voice cracked as tears began to fall. She quickly wiped them with the back of her hand. Mr. Raymond kneeled beside her, his voice full of compassion. "No, child. You did nothing wrong. You don't deserve to be treated like that." And for the first time in her life, Lila felt something she had never known before: kindness. As they sat together, Raymond gently asked her where she came from. At first, she hesitated. Then slowly, her story began to unfold. She told him about the small village she once lived in, a place far from the city, where her parents worked on a farm. Life was poor but filled with love. Then one day a fire broke out in their hut. Her parents never made it out alive. Lila's voice trembled as she spoke. She had been only 8 years old when it happened. After that, she was taken by people who promised to find her work, but instead, they sold her to a maid agency in the city. She worked in different houses, treated like nothing more than a tool, until she ended up here in this mansion. Mr. Raymond listened silently, every word carving deeper into his heart. He couldn't believe such cruelty existed beyond his eyes, and yet it had been happening right under his roof. When she finished, he gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "You will never have to live like that again, Lila, I promise you." Her eyes widened, not with disbelief, but with a faint spark of hope, the kind she thought she'd lost forever. That evening, the mansion felt strangely quiet. Veronica had gone out to attend a dinner with her friends. leaving the house in rare peace. Raymond sat alone in his study, staring at the family portraits on the wall. He saw himself smiling in photographs that no longer felt real. He wondered how his wealth, his success, and his mansion could mean anything when his own home had turned into a place of pain for a child. Outside, snow began to fall again. The same cold night, the same world, but this time, something had changed inside his heart. He walked toward the guest room once more. Layla was sitting by the window, watching the snowflakes fall. She turned and smiled shyly when she saw him. He smiled back. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly. She nodded. "Yes, sir, but it's even more beautiful when someone's kind." Her words struck him deeply simple, pure, yet powerful enough to melt the frozen corners of his soul. That night, while the snow danced outside and the fire glowed inside, two hearts began to heal, one that had known nothing but suffering, and another that had forgotten what compassion felt like. It was the beginning of a bond neither of them could have imagined. A bond that would challenge cruelty, reveal hidden truths, and redefine what it truly meant to be family. Because sometimes, the richest man is not the one who owns the mansion, but the one who opens his heart. The days passed quietly, but the quietness was fragile, like glass that could shatter at any moment. Inside the Raymond mansion, life continued as usual on the surface. Meals were served. Rooms were polished and snow fell silently outside the windows. Yet beneath the luxurious walls, a tension was growing, one that only a few could sense. Lila had begun to settle into the mansion in her own small way. She still worked as a maid, still polished the floors, carried buckets, and cleaned rooms from dawn till dusk. But now she did so under the watchful and protective eyes of Mr. Raymond. He made sure she had proper clothing, warm shoes, and enough food. He encouraged her to read small books he had placed in a quiet corner of the study. She would sit there, turning the fragile pages slowly, savoring the words she had never had the chance to learn before. And in these small moments, a bond grew, a bond of trust, of warmth, of unspoken care. Mr. Raymond watched her from afar sometimes, noting the way her small hands moved, how her eyes lit up when she discovered a new word, how her smile, faint and fragile, began to appear more often. But not everyone noticed these moments with admiration. Veronica, his wife, watched silently from the grand staircase, her lips pressed tightly together. Her jealousy burned quietly at first, then louder as she observed Lila moving through the house with more confidence than she had ever seen. The girl, poor and fragile as she was, had captured something Veronica had lost years ago: attention. Every kind word Raymond had spoken to Lila, every gentle glance made Veronica feel invisible, and that invisible anger quickly turned into cruelty. It started small. She gave Lila the heaviest chores, ones that even the strongest servants struggled to complete. She created impossible tasks, knowing the girl would fail, just to punish her. She deliberately moved objects around the house so that Lila would break them, then shouted at her as if she had done it on purpose. But Lila endured quietly. She did not scream. She did not cry out. Her resilience was remarkable. She smiled faintly as she worked, whispering small prayers to herself, holding on to hope like a fragile candle in the dark. Mr. Raymond noticed. Every small act of endurance, every quiet prayer, every hopeful glance toward the sky did not escape him. It filled him with admiration and sorrow. How could someone so young carry such strength and yet be treated so cruelly? One evening, the household staff gathered in the kitchen, murmuring about the latest incident. A vase broken, a spill blamed on Lila, her hands scraped from mopping the frozen marble floor. Henry, the old butler, shook his head in sadness, but whispered to Mr. Raymond, "She is stronger than we are, sir. Stronger than anyone I have seen." Raymond's heart tightened. He could no longer ignore the injustice, and yet he could not confront Veronica openly. Not yet. He knew her pride, her arrogance, her need to control everything. A sudden confrontation might only make her cruelty sharper. Instead, he chose subtle acts of protection. He would appear suddenly, giving Lila warmth and reassurance. He would assign her lighter chores under the guise of instruction. He would leave small gifts, a warm scarf, a book, a plate of sweet bread, for her to find. These small gestures gave her hope. They reminded her that there were people in the world who saw her worth. And slowly, Lila began to change as well. Her small voice became slightly louder. Her movements are slightly more confident. She dared to look at Mr. Raymond in the eye when he spoke. She dared to smile at herself in the reflection of the polished floors. But Veronica's jealousy only deepened. She watched as Mr. Raymond laughed softly at something Lila said. She saw him bend down to help her with a heavy bucket. She noticed the way he lingered a moment longer when she handed him a freshly polished silver tray. It was as if the child had a light Veronica could no longer produce. And in that light, she felt small, ignored, and furious. One cold December evening, Veronica called Lila to the drawing room under the pretense of organizing ornaments for the winter gala. The girl entered carefully, holding her head low. She worked silently, placing decorations exactly where Veronica instructed. But the lady of the house seemed intent on finding fault. When Lila picked up a fragile ornament, her hand shook slightly. The ornament slipped. A sharp crack echoed through the room. Veronica's voice pierced the air like ice. "Clumsy, you are useless! How can someone as small as you be so reckless?" Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she did not speak. She quietly wiped them and bent to pick up the pieces. Raymond, who had been passing by, noticed immediately. He walked in, his eyes calm but filled with quiet fury. The room seemed to hold its breath. Veronica opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand, silencing her. Instead of anger, Raymond did something unexpected. He gently took Lila's hand, helping her steady the fallen ornament. He looked at her softly, with warmth and reassurance, and whispered, "It's okay. Accidents happen. You're doing your best, and that's enough." The small smile that appeared on Lila's face was faint, but it glowed brighter than any chandelier in the room. For the first time, she truly felt seen. For the first time, she believed that someone in the mansion cared for her more than chores and rules. And in that same moment, Veronica realized she was powerless over the bond forming between her husband and the little girl. She turned away, bitterness twisting inside her, while the fire of Mr. Raymond's quiet kindness lit the room. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, in the quiet of the mansion, the seeds of change were being sown. A bond was growing between the billionaire and the little maid, one that would eventually challenge every cruel action, every injustice, and every harsh word Veronica could throw in their path. And as night fell over the mansion once more, Lila rested peacefully, unaware of the storm of jealousy, but secure in the knowledge that someone powerful, someone kind was now watching over her. In a house filled with wealth and power, it was a small, fragile heart that began to shine the brightest, proving that kindness can never be overshadowed by cruelty. The mansion had never felt so heavy. Even the golden lights and polished floors could not mask the tension that filled every room. Veronica's bitterness had grown like a storm cloud, silent at first, but now threatening to burst. She watched the small figure of Lila move through the house, her every gesture, every smile, feeding the jealousy she had tried to ignore. For Lila, the day began like any other. She woke up early, prepared for another day of work, her small hands trembling slightly as she polished the grand staircase. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and that silence carried a weight she could feel in her chest. She knew Veronica was watching. She knew a single misstep could earn her scolding, punishment, or worse. And yet she did her work diligently, quietly praying for a moment of peace. But peace did not come that day. As the afternoon sunlight fell across the marble floors, Veronica summoned Lila to the dining hall. The girl entered carefully, her eyes downcast, her small hands folded in front of her. Veronica's expression was cold, sharp, and unyielding. "Your chores are not enough," she hissed, her voice slicing through the air. "You think you can clean these halls and still deserve comfort? You are clumsy, useless, and a disgrace to this house." Lila flinched. Her small frame shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of the words. She bowed slightly, whispering, I will try harder, ma'am." Veronica's lips twisted into a cruel smile. She ordered Lila to clean the upper floors. Alone, rooms filled with delicate objects, fragile glass, and priceless ornaments. As Lila worked, her hands shook with exhaustion and fear. Her fingers scraped against a marble edge, cutting slightly, but she did not stop. She whispered a prayer, hoping no one would notice her struggle. And yet someone did. Mr. Raymond had been walking through the hallways, checking on the household when he saw her. A small figure bent over her task, trembling, exhausted, yet determined. He stopped. His heart ached. He had given orders for her to be treated with kindness, yet Veronica's cruelty had reached her once again. He approached quietly at first, observing the scene. The determination in Lila's eyes, the resilience in her small body, and the quiet suffering she endured, stirred something deep inside him, a fury tempered with compassion. That evening, when Veronica returned from her social engagement, she found Mr. Raymond in the main hall. Lila had been resting nearby, quietly recovering from the day's strain. Veronica's eyes narrowed when she saw him speaking to the girl, handing her a warm drink and a small snack. "You continue to spoil her," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "She is a child, not our daughter. She does not belong in this house beyond her work." Mr. Raymond turned toward her, his expression calm, yet his eyes burned with quiet authority. "This house is mine to protect," he said steadily, "and no child under my roof will ever be treated like she was last night, or today or ever again." Veronica's lips parted in disbelief. You cannot—" He held up a hand, silencing her. "No," he said firmly. "I will not allow cruelty here anymore. Layla's under my protection. You may leave if you cannot behave. This house will not reward hatred." For a moment, silence fell. Veronica's pride would not allow her to speak. The servants held their breath. Even Lila, small and timid, dared to glance up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. Mr. Raymond approached the little girl. He knelt beside her, careful not to appear imposing, and softly said, "You are safe now. No one will hurt you here again." Her lips quivered, and she nodded slowly, holding back tears that had long been waiting to fall. That night, for the first time in months, Lila slept peacefully in her own room, the blanket warm, the fire glowing, and a sense of safety wrapping around her like a shield. The mansion, too, seemed to breathe a little easier. The tension that had weighed so heavily was lifting, replaced by the quiet warmth of protection and compassion. Outside, snow began to fall again, each flake covering the world in white, soft and pure. Inside, a small hand rested in a larger one, an unspoken promise passing between them, a promise of care, safety, and hope. Mr. Raymond had learned that wealth meant nothing if it could not shelter the innocent, and Lila had learned that even in the darkest of nights, a single act of kindness could change everything. That night marked the beginning of something new, a shift in the household's power. The mansion no longer belonged solely to gold and vanity. Veronica, witnessing this from the shadows of the grand hallway, realized that her cruelty had not only failed to dominate, but had driven the child closer to the man she could no longer control. Anger, bitterness, and jealousy twisted inside her, but she could do nothing. The power of kindness had triumphed over tyranny in her own house. Weeks passed, and the mansion slowly transformed. Lila's tasks became reasonable. She had a room of her own, warm, bright, and filled with books. Her laughter, soft but genuine, began to echo in the hallways. Mr. Raymond often sat beside her, reading or talking about the stories she discovered, encouraging her curiosity and growth. The staff, once fearful of the mistress, now followed Raymond's example, treating Lila with respect. The mansion, once cold and oppressive, became a home in the truest sense of the word. One snowy evening, as the winter winds blew outside, Lila stood by the large window of her room. She watched the snowflakes drift lazily to the ground, sparkling in the light of the chandeliers. A small smile touched her lips, and she whispered softly to herself, "I am safe. I am home. And I am not alone." Mr. Raymond entered quietly, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. "You have grown stronger than I could have imagined," he said gently. "And remember, no matter what comes, you will always have a place here, with me and in this house." Lila looked up at him, eyes shining. Her journey from fear, cold, and neglect had brought her here, to safety, love, and belonging. The little maid who had once shivered in the snow was now a child filled with hope and courage. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and pure, covering the mansion in a blanket of white. Inside, the warmth of love, protection, and kindness glowed brighter than any fire. The house was no longer a place of cruelty. It was a home. And in that home, Lila finally knew what it meant to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved. In a world where cruelty once ruled, one small heart reminded a man of his own humanity. And together, they found a home built on kindness, hope, and love.